Okay. I don't see anybody yet. Hi there. Welcome to our session. We're still waiting for folks to come in, so feel free to introduce yourself in chat.
Hola a todos, bienvenidos. Aún estamos esperando por algunos panelistas, pero pueden empezar a presentarse, si no les importa, en la sección donde dice chat, su nombre y para dónde, si son padres o si son profesionales. Gracias.
Great. So folks are trickling in, and we're still waiting for folks to move on over to our session. Feel free to introduce yourself in chat.
Nuevamente estamos esperando que más personas se unan a esta sesión. Por favor, siéntase libre de poder presentarse en el área de chat, su nombre y si trabaja para una compañía o si es padre o madre.
Okay. Still missing some folks here. Wonderful. I see folks introducing themselves in chat. Thank you for doing that. And hi Jen, from San Luis Obispo. Welcome.
Estoy notando de que la gente se está empezando a escribir y presentar. Muchas gracias y bienvenidos a todos.
All right. Wonderful. I see Alex is here.
También veo que Alex está aquí.
Hi, Alex.
Hi, Robert.
We're always relieved when the panelist shows up. Glad you made it.
Yeah, I was having technical problems before I showed up, so glad to be here.
Wonderful. I'm glad you worked it out.
Okay.
Just dropping in, seeing if everybody's all good. Hello.
Yeah, we're still waiting for one panelist, I believe.
Okay, who are we waiting for? Let's see.
Vance.
Oh, for Vance? Oh, there he is, right there.
Ah, wonderful.
All
You
right.
spoke it into existence.
There we go. All right, I'll be jumping in and out. You won't see me, but just in case, just go ahead and write help and we'll be there, okay?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, welcome, folks. I see some of you have introduced yourself in chat. Please continue to do so. Great to see where everyone is tuning in from.
Bienvenidos a todos nuevamente. Ya veo que algunos de ustedes se están presentando y es bueno que conocernos y saber quiénes somos.
Okay. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So a big welcome to our attendees. And before I introduce our panelists, I would like to hand it over to the session's interpreter, who will give instructions on how to access the interpretation. So Never, if you would not mind letting folks how to do that.
Yes, may I see the slide, please, for that?
Absolutely.
Entonces, ahora antes de empezar esta sesión, vamos para las personas que hablan español, vamos a mostrarles en la pantalla cómo pueden acceder al canal de interpretación. I still cannot see it.
All right, and it looks like the interpretation is available now. Wonderful. Hi, Vance. Great question. So, yeah, I wasn't sure what the order was, so I was going to leave that up to you guys. Pip thought that perhaps that you were going to go first, Vance, followed by Alex and Wendy. Does that sound good? Great.
Sounds good.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started then. Hi, everyone. So my name is Robert Rochin, and I am the director of the Family Resource Centers Network of California, representing the 47 Family Resource Centers in all 58 counties. I'll be moderating the session today, and I would like to remind you all that you can enter in questions into the Q&A. We will be monitoring that throughout the presentation, and if you have a specific question for one of our panelists, please indicate that because we do have 3 presenters today in this session. So great, so now that the housekeeping is done, I would love to officially welcome you to the breakout on climate change effect for children and youth with special healthcare needs. I would like to introduce you to our wonderful panelists. We have Vance Taylor, the Chief Office of Access and Functional Needs of the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. And the purpose of the Office of Access and Functional Need is to identify the needs of individuals with disabilities and others with access or functional needs before, during, and after disasters, and to integrate them into the state's emergency management system. We also will have Alex Ghenis, the Deputy Director at Sustain Our Abilities. Sustain Our Abilities is a US-based nonprofit focused on the intersection of climate, health, and disability. And to round out our panel, we will have Wendy Longwell, the Program Manager of the Disability Action Center. The Disability Action Center is a private, nonprofit organization founded in 1980 to meet specific needs of people with disabilities living in Northern California. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Vance, who will be our first presenter. Vance.
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate it. Alex, good to see you.
Likewise.
En verdad, muchas gracias por hablar en español para que todos puedan entender. All right. So it's a real pleasure to be here, and I'm so glad that the folks are on. I know it's difficult anytime we do an event online. We're competing with Netflix, and that's a challenge. So thank you for being here. When it comes to this particular issue of climate change, I think I want to just take a step back and let's talk context and history, right? It's important for us to all understand that what we find in emergency management is that every time there's a disaster, whether that's a flood, a fire, an earthquake, an extreme weather event, the most disproportionately impacted individuals are always individuals with access or functional needs. And access and functional needs, think of that as sort of an umbrella, right? And underneath that umbrella, you've got individuals who have intellectual, physical, developmental disabilities. And you've also got a lot of other populations, including individuals whose primary language isn't English, and people who are transportation disadvantaged, and women in late stages of pregnancy, and people in institutionalized settings. And so when we look at access and functional needs, we can't think of it through the lens of onesie twosies. We're talking about massive numbers of people, all of whom have an equal right to emergency management services, all of whom have value and who deserve to be safe, secure, and independent in a way that enables them to maintain their dignity before, during, and after disasters. Now, traditionally, we've seen that people with access and functional needs have been marginalized from the emergency management process. So what does that look like? Well, Hurricane Katrina provides the real, I think, national case study, right? We saw that in the aftermath of Katrina, it was 70% of everyone who died that had an access or functional need. And it's because in large part, emergency managers who were fantastic people wanting to do good things, but they were planning amongst themselves. And despite their best intention, they lacked the perspective that comes from living with an access and functional need. And so they would say, hey, we're going to do a press conference, and that's how we get information out there. But they didn't think about the fact that the message is going out, we're going to fall on deaf ears. They didn't think about the fact that when you point to an evacuation map and say, go here for safety, people who are blind or have low vision, that they can't process that. They didn't think about the fact that when you put information out in only English, that anyone that doesn't speak English is now unaware of what the event is, how to prepare, and what appropriate steps they should be taking. And so it is in those ways that people who are categorized as the most socially vulnerable were left high and dry when it came to finding out the emergency related information that they needed. And so they couldn't plan and they couldn't prepare because ultimately they didn't know what was coming. We saw it during evacuation as well, where communities would say, hey, if you have to evacuate, then go, we'll put you on a school bus and we'll get you out of here. Well, that's great, unless of course you can't get to the school bus. That's great, unless of course you show up in a wheelchair and there's no ramp, there's no lift. And then you're faced with that terrible decision about, do I get picked up out of my wheelchair and put on the school bus, knowing that wherever it is I end up, I'm not going to have my legs? Or do I stay in this impact area, remain in my wheelchair, and hope that things will be okay? It's a terrible choice. We saw shelters that were set up on the second floor of buildings with no elevators. We saw other shelters where people could get in, they were physically accessible, but they were not programmatically accessible. Meaning, if somebody showed up without their support network, there's nobody to help with feeding. There was nobody to transfer them from their wheelchair into a cot. There was nobody to assist them with toileting. And so people with access and functional needs would go and essentially dwindle on the vine. This caused a divide between emergency managers and the community. Now, to bridge that gap, California took this approach where we leaned forward, and the governor created the Office of Access and Functional Needs and placed it within his Office of Emergency Services. He appointed a senior level executive to serve as chief of that office to advise the governor and the director on these issues. Now, I've been in that role since 2015, and my job is to really lean forward on our mission, which is to identify what are the needs that all Californians have before, during, and after disasters, and Then once we've identified those needs, to work with our communities to bring them to the table with emergency managers, so that together, using a whole of community approach, we can engage in integrated inclusive planning. I will tell you, it's not always been an easy process. It's difficult when you take people that feel like they're on opposite ends of a spectrum and put them at the table together. But what we have found is that once they're working together, they're able to build trust. And essentially we find that it's tough to hate people up close, right? You start to see each other's humanity. You start to see that you have shared goals. And you start to see that in working together, you can actually achieve those goals. So fast forward, we're at a place now where communities are now experiencing a cultural shift, where instead of access and functioning as being an afterthought, it's right on the front of our minds. That when we start thinking about disasters, we start immediately wanting to know, how do we ensure everyone in the community we serve is going to get information, that they can prepare, that they can evacuate, that they can shelter in safety, and ultimately that they can recover in a form and a fashion that's going to enable them to get on with their lives. So I share all that as context, but let me now put that, or it's history, but let me now put it within the context of climate change. The reality is, I hear people talk a lot about when climate change comes, right? That, oh, down the road, 10 years, 15 years, 30 years, 50 years. What I will tell you is that we're living with the impacts of climate change right now. Let me give you an example. In the month of January, we had 9 atmospheric rivers impact California. We had the worst flooding we've had in over a decade. In February, we saw the damage that caused, not just to homes, but to infrastructure. And then at the end of the month up through now, we've had the worst snow impacts we've had, again, in decades, where people have been trapped inside their homes, where communities have been cut off from major roadways, from hospitals, from food supplies and sources, from gas stations. And that's just the front end of 2023. Before I came on to Cal OES, we had I think about a dozen presidentially declared disasters. And the previous, I'm sorry, it was 5 presidentially declared disasters in the previous dozen years. Since I've been on, we've had, I think it's closer to 15 declared disasters at the presidential level, and over 20 that were major declarations. So what we're seeing is an exponential increase in the number of disasters we're facing. And it's not just that we're facing more and more disasters. It's that the scope and devastation that's associated with those disasters is increasing as well. there is virtually no community left in the state that has not been impacted by an emergency event. Either wildfires, floods, extreme heat, extreme cold, power outage, air quality index, or earthquakes. Emergencies used to happen to other people, right? We'd watch the news. There was always other people. And now it's us. Every person here will be impacted by some sort of climate-driven disaster or event. And if you think about that, it feels a little scary. But what I can tell you is that there are steps you can take to prepare and to plan. But as you do so, will change your perspective from one of fear to one of empowerment. And so you think about yourself and your own needs, then you think about your family and their needs, and you think about the community and their needs. And we work to engage and support at every level. There are clear things you can do. One is sign up for emergency alerts. Those are free. You can go to calalerts.org and sign up for free emergency alerts. They'll come to you anywhere in the state, even if you're traveling. The other thing is come up with a personal preparedness plan, right? If I have to stay at home for a few days, what are the things that I need to have? Food, medicine, supplies. The other thing you can do is come up with an evacuation plan. If I have to get out of my home, who are the 5 people I can call that are going to help me? Right? I think about that. I can't drive myself. So I know that if I have to evacuate my home, I got to rely on somebody else for assistance. So on my list, I've got my wife, right? She's a fan. Assuming I brought flowers recently, she'll help me out. My mom lives in the next city over. So she's on my list. We had 9 good months together in the womb, so we're pretty tight. I've got a neighbor, I've got a colleague from work, and I've got a friend at church. The idea here isn't that they're all going to be available 24/7. But the expectation is that at least one of those 5 people will be available to assist me anytime there's something that causes me to have to evacuate. Getting those alerts, setting up a preparedness plan, putting together my evacuation, it's all free. It doesn't cost anything. It just takes a little bit of time and some deliberate thought. There's resources that will give you checklists and show you how to do it. And again, it doesn't cost anything, but it can save you everything. It can save time when you don't have it. Ultimately, it can save your life. Now, again, climate change is real. We feel the impacts today, but we can prepare and plan in a way that empowers us and our families to be safe, secure, and independent, and to be able to address emergency management in a way that also enables us to maintain our dignity. And that's because we're planning individually and as communities. We all need each other. No one does this alone. It's a lift. But if you'll lift, and I'll lift, and I know Robert and Alex are going to lift, together our communities will ascend. That's a good thing. So I'll turn the time back over to Robert. I know we're going to have some Q&A that happens later, and I look forward to that portion of the agenda.
Thank you, Vance. And I really appreciate that reminder that all folks have the right and deserve to be safe, secure, and independent during, before, during, and after a disaster. Thank you so much for that. And I'm going to hand it over to Alex now. Alex Ghenis, if you wouldn't. I think you have a PowerPoint in.
Yeah,
Perfect.
I do. Let me find that for you. All right, here we go. So, hi everyone. My name is Alex Ghenis. I'm the Deputy Director of Sustain Our Abilities. We're a nonprofit focused on climate, health, and disability. I live here in California in Oakland. I've been in California most of my life outside of some time in Oregon. And I'm going to talk about a framework for addressing climate change and disability. So this is actually kind of a high level thing, and I hope as Vance said, empowerment is really important. I hope it kind of helps you think about climate and disability and empowers you to either make a difference or understand that you're already making a difference. So here we go. So the framework here is that climate change is complex, and so is disability. Climate includes long-term climate changes and short-term climate changes, mitigation, which would be reducing carbon emissions, adaptation, so getting ready for it, impacts on the economy, good and bad, and more. Disability includes categories and diagnoses, medical and social contributors to disability, medical needs, accommodations and accessibility needs, intersectional factors, and individual experience. So I'll talk about that actually in a little bit, but basically, climate and disability includes the totality of connections between each part of climate change and each part of disability. And every connection is a useful, I say, line of inquiry. It's a useful thing just to think about within kind of the umbrella of climate change and disability. And then people with disabilities should be involved in addressing climate change and pursuing disability climate justice. This gets back to the old disability refrain of nothing about us without us. We absolutely have to be involved. So, in terms of the way we think about disability, I'm sure plenty of you know this, but the historical way that people tended to look at disability was the medical model, which says that there's the able-bodied norm, and any deviation from that is kind of bad and weird, and we need to fix it. So there's medical factors that make people disabled, and then we need kind of medical solutions. We need, therapies. We need medications. We need treatments, and then the social factors and stuff that's kind of off to the side. Really, the goal was to make people with disabilities able-bodied. That's not a great way to look at it. There was kind of a pivot the other way, which is to move to the social model of disability, which is newer, and it's in most kind of disability rights frameworks. It says medical factors and solutions really need to be set aside because there is no able-bodied norm. There are simply different levels of ability across all different types of abilities, mobility, hearing, visual, cognitive, intellectual, chronic health, etc. But really, the things that make people quote unquote disabled are social barriers and social factors. The way that I always say this is, I have a spinal cord injury. The medical model says I'm disabled because I can't walk upstairs. The social model says that the thing that's actually disabling me is the lack of an elevator or a ramp. And this goes through all different parts of disability, and then the solution there would be to build an elevator or a ramp, right? The reality, kind of the way that I look at it, is figuring out how to balance both models. I do think that there is a little bit of a worthwhile way for me to say, okay, I do have to focus on keeping my body relatively healthy. I'm not working toward being able-bodied, but certainly I shouldn't shirk medicine or kind of medical interventions to manage my disability. I actually have 2 disabilities. I also have epilepsy. But really, that fits within kind of social factors and solutions. I'm not going to go into this pie chart. I hope that it's helpful, but I'm going to jump over to the climate and disability stuff in the interest of time. So the way to look at climate change and disability, and this is kind of a 2-part framework I'm going to put forward, but basically is that climate change has numerous impacts on society, and there are also many types of disabilities and aspects of living with a disability. And these can vary by location. Here in California, we have all sorts of different climatic impacts. We have the blizzards that just hit. We've had fires. We certainly have floods. We have extreme heat in places like the high desert in the Central Valley. And these really vary by location.
Hi,
The
Alex.
climate,
Really
yeah,
quickly, sorry
yeah,
to interrupt. Can you slow down just a little bit so the
yes.
interpreter can catch up?
I'm
No
very
worries,
sorry
though.
about that. I will go
Thank you for that.
slower. So the climate change impacts are extreme weather, so just in general, and then also specifics. More extreme weather just says, hey, we're going to have more storms and you get ready for it. Specifics would be things like looking at how does a blizzard impact things. Damaged infrastructure. A flood wipes out a bridge and then that impacts people. Economic consequences, if that flood wipes out a bridge and then a local store can't operate because it doesn't have what it needs, then that could impact the employees and the local community. And there are kind of larger, longer term consequences there. Harm to government capacities. This worries me. And, Vance certainly has seen it firsthand as a government staff member, is that, this is all these disasters and climate changes are taxing on the government. The government might have less money coming in. They might spend more money on managing climate change. What I look at that from a disability standpoint is that that might kind of make the government look and try to balance its books in a way that hits the things that help us survive and be independent. And then there are effectively uninhabitable areas. This could be, for example, from sea level rise, dislocation from a disaster, or from that kind of someplace being effectively uninhabitable. And then proactive migration, which would be saying, hey, you know what? We know this area is going to deal with regular flooding in 20, 30 years, and it's better to start figuring out how to move now. That is happening, and that might be something that happens in California. Spreading disease. This could be from largely tropical and insect-borne diseases. Social upheaval and conflict, that's a much bigger can of worms I won't touch on today. Disability factors could be broad categories such as mobility or intellectual and developmental disabilities. By the way, interpreter, is this an okay speed? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Okay, I'll assume it's okay.
I think it is, yeah.
Okay, great. Sorry. Then specific disabilities such as multiple sclerosis, right? Use of or need for government services, very much different based on the type of disability. Use of medical care, personal care attendance, etc. Housing needs, if someone needs accessible housing, that's huge. Mobility and transportation. And what that means, this again can vary by location. Paratransit is vastly different just from county to county, for example. Economic barriers and opportunities. There are opportunities right now, for example, with growing employment of people with disabilities now that remote work is more normalized. And economic barriers would be, say, income limits to maintain government benefits. Then intersectional factors, race and income, the experience of people of color with disabilities in society is different than it is for white folks. Same at different income scales, and there are other intersectional factors. Vance brought up, for example, language as well. Now, what is climate change and disability? We look at the connections between each of these categories. Each connection is a piece of climate and disability. And you could look at this and say, that's overwhelming. Or you can look at this and say, what I think, that's empowering. That helps me understand that if I am learning about spreading disease on people with multiple sclerosis, I'm learning about part of climate and disability. If I'm working on that, then I am already working on and contributing to the improvement of the experience of people with disabilities in climate change. So let's look at some specifics here, looking at more extreme weather and broad categories. So digging deeper, we can break things down even farther and draw yet more connections. Just going to read through these without explaining them. But for extreme weather, you have heavy rain and flooding, tropical cyclones, thunderstorms, extreme heat. That's certainly going up, and I think it's called the silent killer. It's a big concern. Fire weather, that's here in California, that's hot, dry, and windy. Windstorms and what that means for, say, the power outages that we've seen. Cold snaps, huge, and really, speaking of intersectional factors, that really impacts the unhoused, the homeless population, and they have a higher rate of disability than people who have homes. Blizzards and heavy snow, we're seeing that right now and coming up. On disability categories, you have mobility, you have blind or low vision, deaf or hard of hearing, chronic pain and or fatigue, immunocompromised, psychological disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities, and learning disabilities. But as I mentioned earlier, if somebody is, even helping their local community plan for extreme heat for people who are immunocompromised and may have a difficulty with their body regulating temperature, then they are working on and helping out with climate change and disability. Again, I hope that people lean toward being empowered rather than overwhelmed with all of this. Now, we can focus on mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation involves slowing and reversing climate change. Adaptation is preparing for what's on the way, and both are important for disability climate justice. So inclusive mitigation, some examples there would be providing affordable and reliable green electricity and other utilities, developing more sustainable medical systems, and safeguarding all necessary systems in the face of more sustainable medical systems. I was just reading off the slide here, but that would be reducing plastics in the medical system, right? Designing accessible all-electric personal vehicles, providing reliable, widespread public transit, providing accessible, transit-oriented development, housing, and low-carbon urban design. I've become more and more interested lately with making sure that our cities, have a lower carbon footprint. Dense housing, dense areas, the people in them produce fewer emissions, and that housing should be accessible and affordable, right? List goes on. Then employment opportunities in mitigation. We all can work on that together. Accessible adaptation would be disaster planning, readiness and response, prioritizing recovery for disability needs, revising international and domestic laws to accommodate climate migrants with disabilities. Honestly, with the disasters that hit California, people sometimes move either before them or after them, and we should support people who are moving either to California, around California, things like that. Preparing more climate stable areas for an influx of people with disabilities. Here in California, some places honestly are more stable in the face of climate change, and we need to make sure that there are services there and services and infrastructure that support people with disabilities. Maintaining government funding for healthcare and social services. We absolutely need to continue the long legacy of disability rights activism to maintain all of that funding in the future. And then employment opportunities and adaptation. My goodness, Vance has a job in adaptation. Let's get more Vances out there, right? Now, there's a couple more slides after this I don't have time for, but I will just explain kind of this little flow chart. It's the flow chart that I put together to look at how somebody with a specific disability or a group of people with a specific disability, how they are affected by a specific climate impact. So the way that I look at this is you can split disability into a medical side and a social side. And that gets back to the medical and social models that I talked about earlier. On the medical side, you would talk about somebody's baseline health and then their medical risk factors, their healthcare needs. On the social side, economic barriers that they may face in life, accessibility needs that they have, independent living needs that they have. And then you ask, how does a specific climate impact affect each of those? I won't go into detail, but I, as having a spinal cord injury, have a hard time with extreme heat, just regulating my body temperature. So on the medical side, a risk factor around that would be heat stroke or heat exhaustion, right? Healthcare needs, being able to go to the emergency room to deal with that heat exhaustion. On the social side, accessibility needs would be really ideally housing with some sort of air conditioning or some sort of accessibility, really. And then a climate impact would ask, how does heat affect each of those? So I already talked about health. On the what I say the structural considerations side of things, that's the social side. You would say, okay, how do we make sure that accessible housing is also well insulated, has good air conditioning, etc. You bring all those, I say, considerations together, and you say, okay, now we know how a specific climate impact affects a group of people with a specific disability. And then we ask, what kind of solutions will improve the health, well-being, and independence of those people with disabilities in the face of that climate impact? You can have medical and rehabilitative interventions. There are cooling vests that people could purchase. Personal actions, identifying where a nearby cooling shelter is and making sure that it's accessible. Infrastructure investments, that would be government investing in accessible cooling shelters. Government response would be educating and empowering people with disabilities around being climate safe in the face of that climate impact. Sufficient services would be, for example, providing personal care supports at a cooling shelter, or figuring out a way to make sure that somebody can have those there. And then finally, climate action, and just really working to slow down climate change to have fewer of these impacts. So that's that. Thank you. And yeah, I think it's passing it back over to Robert.
Thank you, Alex. And thank you for that reminder about examining disability factors to really start thinking about solutions and to not feel overwhelmed, but really to be learning to become empowered. Great reminders. Thank you, Alex. So I'm going to hand it over to Wendy Longwell, and we have your PowerPoint for you. So we'll be sharing that on the screen right now. And just a quick reminder, if you do have any questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A section.
So hello, everybody. My name is Wendy Longwell, and I'm going to be talking more on the personal level of what you can do to prepare. So are you guys going to advance my slides as I go, Robert?
Yes, just let us know when to advance.
Okay, go ahead and advance. So on a personal level, being prepared, you have to think of all the different types of emergencies that climate change is bringing to us, whether we need to evacuate because of a fire, what do we need to prepare for in a drought situation, power outages, or if we just need to shelter in place, which has been happening to a lot of people with all of the snow. And each thing requires planning, and it's different planning for each thing. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So advance the slide. So these are the counties that Disability Action Center serve, and I work with individuals on helping them make plans on what they need to be ready for in case something happens. And as Vance and Alex have shared with us, in the last several years, with all the fires that have hit up here, as well as the drought, it has shown us areas that we were not prepared for. And so doing more planning on the local level and on the individual level, so that that we're ready up here in the far north, where it sometimes takes a while to get emergency services up here. Next slide, please. So when you evacuate, one is talking about it. What are you going to take with you? What do you want to have ready to just grab and go? This picture is of my son and his animals. And I asked him one day what would your plan be if you were here? He doesn't have a vehicle. He has a scooter and a wheelchair. What would you do if you were home by yourself and you got an evacuation notice? And I took this picture because he said I'd grab my dogs and my cow and I would get on my scooter and I'd go down Highway 44 till I got into town. And I'm like, yeah, not the best plan. With all the panic drivers going down that highway, that wouldn't be the safest route for you to take. And so then discussing it with your loved one as far as, okay, so what is a safe plan for you if you're not home to help them? What important papers do they need to take? Their medications that if they're going to be gone for a while, they're going to need their medications. What medical supplies, what pets are they going to be able to take, and what ones are you going to have to leave behind? If you have several like we do, there is no way Derek could take all of his pets. And then the last thing that I have created is what makes me binder. And this helps a person with a disability advocate for themselves and to educate about their disability. Next slide. So this is a picture of my other son who has vision issues. So the What Makes Me binder is just a 3-ring binder that goes through and explains the disability, what kinds of medications or equipment they may need. That way, if they can't take it all with them, they have a list of and possibly even pictures in there of the equipment that they may need in an evacuation center. And what other kind of accommodations are they going to need? So there's several pages in there. It's also picture-based for those that need to have pictures instead of just words. And this is what I've been helping people create to keep their list of everything, their important paperwork, who are their doctors, who's their pharmacy that they use. So that way, if they do need, maybe they forget their inhaler and because of the smoke from the fire that they evacuated from, how am I going to get it? They have a list of what that inhaler is, who the pharmacy and the doctor that prescribed it, so that they can have somebody help them acquire a new one for them. So that's what I've really been working on, trying to get people to develop so that they have everything they need in one spot. Next slide, please. So talking about drought, there's lots of different things that you can do to prepare for a drought. One of the things that we have done is the juice bottles, the gallon juice bottles, like the cranberry juice, that kind of thing. When they get empty, we wash them out and we fill them with water to keep as a backup. We also freeze some of them, so that way if the power goes out during the summer, we have a way to take them out of the freezer, put them in the refrigerator to keep our food fresh. So those are things that we do. The other thing is, if you have property, is storage tanks. These are pictures of my 2 storage tanks that I've acquired. Have not had the money to get them in yet, but I do have one step towards that direction. Having defensible space around the house that you live in, that is really important so that you don't have things laying around your house that is going to easily catch fire, that is then going to cause damage to your house. And then you can even do the sprinkler systems and other things so that your house is more defensible, so that it is more likely that your house is going to make it through a fire. And so there's lots of different things that you can do. There's different products that you can paint your house with that makes it more flame retardant. There's a whole lot of stuff. I've done a lot of research, but unfortunately, all of this costs money. And so you have to plan for it and look for resources that could help you pay for it. Next slide, please. So the next one that we're going to talk about is power outages. Again, having flashlight, candles, oil lamps, anything like that, that you can, so that you can still have light when the power goes out. I know this is probably really the most stressful for my son. Okay, evacuate, I'll grab what I need and go, but I can literally see my son tense up when the power goes out. And he just gets so worried about everything. His equipment is not going to work. So what is he going to do? Yes, we can go to a hotel, but he can't take his equipment with him. So planning for all of that. And again, the more you have planned, the more that you talk about it, the less stress that you go through when it actually does happen. And I'm pretty sure everybody in California at one time or another has had the power out because of a fire, because of weather. And so the more you talk about your plan for when that happens, then the easier it is for everybody to just move forward when the power goes out. And those planning is, okay, so where are you going to keep those flashlights or candles? How are you going to cook while your power's out? If it's in the summer, how are you going to cool? Keep your house cool or keep it heated in the winter. These are all things that you have to plan for. These snowstorms that we've literally had people without power for over a week that we have been trying to get out, but they're snowed in. And the local emergency services have literally had to go in on snowmobiles to take people out on oxygen to get them down to hotels so they can get back to where they can be eating and have heat. And so it's, just essential that you do plan for this and have backup people that are checking up on you if they can't get a hold of you, so they know to send somebody out to look for you. If you are on a well, how are you going to get water when your power's out? Do you have backup batteries that you can plug your equipment into? Do you have a generator that can run your house? This is a picture of my generator. This costed me $12,000 to get installed. It is a whole house generator that also runs my well. But so you can definitely go smaller than I did, but I did this because it is stress-free for my son. This generator turns on 30 seconds after the power goes out, and it turns itself off after the power comes on. So if Derek is here by himself, he doesn't have to do anything. Power goes out, the generator just automatically comes on for him. So yes, there's cheaper versions. This was what works for us. But even the cheaper version still costs money, still requires planning on how are you going to get that money to get it installed. Once you have the generator, how are you going to run it? Mine is run off of propane gas, so I have to make sure my propane tank is always full. Somebody that lives up in my area, higher up in the mountain than me, got snowed in so bad that the propane company wouldn't come and fill her tank, and she ran out of gas. So she had no heat, no way to cook, nothing. And she couldn't get out of her house. And so she called me, and we got her out of her house and down to a hotel. But this is why it's important to plan ahead. Make sure you have the gas to run whatever equipment that you have, whether it's a small generator that you just pull up on your porch versus a big one like this. And then if you have solar panels, a lot of people have gone into having solar, but there's also the backup batteries that go with it. If you have solar, if the power goes out, you may not have access to your stored energy because the power's out. But if you have the backup batteries with the solar panels, you would be able to switch over and use that. But that is an added expense. And so again, it takes a lot of planning and saving up money to be able to do these things. Next slide, please. So shelter in place. This is pictures of my property with the snow that we just got last week. I was snowed in, could not get out. People were not coming up to my area to help. right away anyways. They eventually got up here. So, and I know that that's where we have chosen to live. One, it's cooler up here. My son, like Alex, is heat sensitive. He has spina bifida and he cannot be over 80 degrees. So we chose to live up here because it's cooler. But consequently, I know that there's a chance of bad weather. And so I have a lot of food storage. My kids like to joke around with me that it's like going into my pantries, like going to a mini 7-Eleven. But I can go a good 3 months. Will I have my son's favorite foods? No, but I will have food to feed him for up to 3 months, which I've never had to do. A week has been the most I've had to go. But I have that much because if something major happens and my other kids who live around this area all come home, I need to be able to feed all of them as well. Water storage. When it's freezing like this, you might have frozen pipes and so you can't get water. So again, having those jugs of water, I always have at least 10 of those sitting off to the side, plus some in the freezer. And then your medications, always making sure you have plenty of medications. I know this is one thing that when I first started in this world of planning for somebody who has a disability, I'm like, how do you get extra medications? You get a prescription, Medi-Cal pays for that 30-day supply. How are you supposed to, what if this emergency happens 5 days before the end of the month and you haven't been able to get it refilled yet? Where are you going to go for this extra medication? I have found different ways to be able to do this. One, my son goes in the hospital a lot. So when he goes in the hospital is giving him his medication. So I take that medication and put it aside as our backup supply. Another thing I've done is if it's my son is on a controlled medication. So I've asked the doctor, hey, would you, when we first started, would you write it for that he's taking a little bit of extra for the first prescription so I can get that backup supply? And I've had doctors willing to do that when I explain to them where I live and why I'm asking for it. I get 2 EpiPens, so I always have a backup. Those are things that you need to talk to your doctor about so that you can get that backup supply. Same thing with medical supplies. My son has to catheterize. He cannot empty his bladder without a catheter. So if I don't have extra and we don't have a way to get any, which we have not had deliveries or garbage pickup for 2 weeks up here. So if I ran out, what would I do? Again, what I've done is he has to catheterize 5 times a day. I asked the doctor to write it for 6 times a day. So that way I get extra catheters each month so that if something happens, I have that extra supply. Same thing for pull-ups, for all of the different stuff that I need for him. How much do I actually need to use? Ask for 1 extra, and it builds up your backup supply. So those are things that you can do with, for shelter in place, but also if you have to evacuate, you have that extra, take it with you. Because if it's a disaster that it's affecting the whole area, it may be a while before you can get medications and medical supplies. Make sure to take that stuff. It's important to plan ahead so that you have what you need for your loved one. Next slide. So as I've been saying throughout this whole thing, plan. You have to plan for these things because it takes money and time to prepare. Yes, you can ask for extra catheters to be put in a prescription, but it's going to take a couple of months before you have a good backup supply. So this is not something you can wait until the last minute to do. I now have probably, my son is 28. I've been doing this for years now. I have enough backup for him that I could go 6 months without having any medical supplies delivered to me. That took time to build up, but I now have it, and I know I can take care of my son and keep him going until stuff started going again if we had a major shutdown. start with writing out your plan. What would you need to go a week, up to a month, to keep your loved one healthy until you could get them out and get them the medical stuff that they need? Then you create that list of needs and make a plan on how you're going to do it. Talk to your medical provider, and start making a plan of getting that extra stuff written in the prescription. Create a list of costs, and then start looking for agencies that can help you with those costs. It's not always easy to find, and it's not always easy to access. They always say that there are programs out there to help you. So to give you an example, there's agencies out there that can help you with accessibility in your house if you own your own house, or if your landlord says that you can do it. But I asked for that pack for, I called that agency, said, okay, what do I need to do? They sent me a 20+ page packet that I was going to have to fill out, and all of these supporting documents I was going to have to send you. There is no way my son would be able to do that on his own. And even me, I got about halfway through it, making a list of all the supporting documents. And I'm like, all right, this is going to have to be put to the side. It is just way too much and too cumbersome for me to deal with right now with everything else that I'm dealing with. So there are agencies out there, but it is not easy to access that help once you do find it. So again, it's not something you want to wait to the last minute to do. This is planning. Reach out to them, find out what it is that you're going to have to put together so that you can access their help. Next slide, please. So power companies, they're raising their rates. They've raised them up over 30% in just the last couple of years. And that is costing people a lot of money that have medical equipment. And yes, there are programs out there that help give you a discount. Believe me when I tell you, I have a son who cannot be above 80 degrees. My bill in the summer is anywhere from $600 to $800 a month to keep him cool. And so by the end of summer, I have a huge bill because I can't afford $600 a month. And so I pay what I can. And then all winter long, I'm paying off that summer bill. Yes, they will tell you there's programs out there. Again, it was a multiple page form that you had to fill out to get the help to pay off the bill. To get the rate discounts on your monthly bill, you have to get a doctor to sign off. Again, it is not a quick process. It is not an easy process. And so getting started on it early is definitely beneficial, but it's something that we need to start talking about. We keep getting told that there's help out there, but this help is hard to do. If I have a hard time and I don't have a disability and it is overwhelming to me to apply for these for my son, how is somebody with a disability that really struggles with reading or understanding what it is that they need or writing, how are they going to be able to access these programs? Next slide, please. So what you can do, this is a picture several years ago, but Derek and I visit the Capitol a lot of time. And when he was younger, we went through Family Voices and visited our senators and our assembly members and writing letters to them, visiting them in their home office or at the Capitol, talking to them about access to these programs, how it's difficult for you. Give them examples. Talking about it or giving them a letter doesn't always make the point. Just to give you an example, I did this every year with Family Voices. One year, forget how old Derek was, but I was struggling getting Medi-Cal and everybody together to fix my son's wheelchair, and his wheelchair literally was falling apart. So we went to visit our senator and our assembly member and I talked to them about the difficulty of getting these different agencies that are supposed to help you with wheelchair repair to work together to get it repaired. And I'm seeing he's nodding his head. Yeah, sure, I understand. And so I said, you know, there's CPS out there. If you have a child that you don't feed or clothe appropriately, you get turned into CPS to protect that child, correct? And they're like, yeah. And I said, okay, so my son's wheelchair is a part of him. It's part of his clothing, and he can't access anything without it. And they're like, well, yeah, of course. And I said, so then you tell me, how is my son supposed to be able to access his education and anything else when his wheelchair is in this condition? And I said, Derek, can you lean forward? And he leaned forward and the whole back of his wheelchair fell out. By the time I was halfway home, I got a phone call, and it was the wheelchair place that I use saying, we got a phone call from the state senator saying that we are to get that in tomorrow to get it fixed. I made a point. Things changed for my son right then, but also they then asked me to be on a committee to talk about how do we need to make change in the long run so these things don't happen. So yes, talking the talk is good, but giving them actual examples of how it has affected your loved one is so important to bring it home. And that's what Family Voices does really well. But you can do it with them, you can do it on your own. I call our assembly member all the time saying, hey, what about this? I keep in contact with them. I stay on committees so that I can make sure the voice is heard at the right level to make the change that we need to make down at this level so that our loved ones can live the life they should be able to live. So I encourage all of you to do this. You can start with letters if you're more comfortable than visiting with them, but wherever you're comfortable at, start making those appointments, start sending those letters, making your point, giving good, solid examples of why change needs to happen. Thank you. That's it. That's it for me.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And honestly, for those helpful tips on how to build up your medical supplies and the reminders to visit your assembly member or senator, I applaud your advocacy. So well done. Great. So yeah, I think we do. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but I did have some questions as we were listening to the presentations. And so if we can have all of the panelists pinned back on the screen, that would be great. And from what I've gathered from this session really is that planning is critical, right? So, and Vance had mentioned steps to be prepared, like creating a person preparedness plan or evacuation plans. And so my question is not only to Vance, but to everyone on this panel, are there any templates or checklists that folks could download to kind of get started on working on these?
Yeah, great question. There are, in fact. So if you go to the CalOS website, then you can get to the website for the Office of Access and Functional Needs. And we have this thing called the AFN library. And you can get checklists, you can get videos, you can get best practices, you can get white papers, you can get any resource you can think of that's in there. And some of that's going to be specific for emergency managers, and a lot of it's going to be specific for individuals. So you can check that. I would encourage you to do so. And if you got other great things we want to put up there, send them our way and we'll add them.
Perfect. I think Gina just dropped that into the chat. Thank you, Gina. Does anyone else have any recommendations?
This is Wendy. There's a lot of different ones out there. So, do a search, find the one that works best for you and your loved one that has a disability. Because if it doesn't make sense to the person who has the disability, it's not going to be used. So for my son, I've actually used pieces of several different ones that made it to where he could understand and know step by step what he should do if he's home by himself. So, you know, do that if you need to, whatever, but research all the different ones out there. So many agencies have them. Far Northern Regional Center or the regional centers have theirs. Look at all of them and see what works for you.
I would say
Right. And thank you for that.
with all of that,
Sorry, Alex.
yeah, take those resources, make your own checklist. And I certainly know, you know, with Wendy mentioning food and medical supplies, things expire, and something that's not always on the checklist is to do an inventory occasionally, you know, especially before fire season, before, you know, snow blizzard season, whenever that comes around. And depending on where you live, the timeline of how many resources you should have on hand is going to be different. You know, but if you might get snowed in or really isolated, that's a different timeline than if you live in an urban area and that isn't maybe going to get cut off from supplies and supply lines.
Yeah, and
Yes,
Robert, I
it's
just
very,
put 2 links in there. One is to the AFN library I was talking about, and the other is to ready.gov, which has great resources.
Oh, excellent. And I really like that idea, Wendy, about having to, maybe you do need to curate something and borrow a little bit from everywhere, whatever fits. I think that's a great point. And I saw that Connie, did you have a question? So, okay, great. So Connie is asking that she works for TCS in Contra Costa County, and they have several children in medical therapy units. So is there a resource for unit safety plan?
I am not sure.
Yeah, Vance, I
Connie,
think that's your
we may be stumped.
wheelhouse.
What was the question, Robert?
Yeah, so she's looking for, she works with medically in the medical therapy unit. And is there a resource around a unit safety plan? So it sounds like the whole building or the whole program.
When my
I'm not sure.
when my son was younger and was in the medical therapy unit, I was always the one that took him, and so I always stayed around so I would be able to evacuate him. But I know that there are kids that are bussed in. So I would say your number one priority is, do you have transportation to evacuate wheelchairs and other accessible transportation? That's not, because the buses don't always stay there. They drop them off, go do other rounds, come back and pick them up. So I would say that's probably your first and most important one to think about.
Great point. And
I-
so Connie, yeah, definitely check out those resources that were dropped in there, because as Wendy mentioned, you may be able to curate something from all of those resources. And Alex, I'm sorry, I cut you off there.
I mean, you know, just a kind of backstop failsafe there. If there aren't any specific resources for medical units, taking an individualized checklist and just multiplying it by the number of people that are in the medical therapy unit would at least give you a number of how many supplies you should have on hand. Evacuation, et cetera, is a different story, but for backup supplies, yes.
Great. Thank you. And then one more question for the panel here. So a lot of the panelists here mentioned, you know, having storage tanks for water or backup batteries or generators. And, you know, Wendy, I know you touched on a little bit of, you know, finding an agency that can help you with, you know, getting some of those costs, right, financially, and it just being overwhelming and navigating. But does anyone have any of those resources that they could share, an agency name or where to start looking locally to get some help with that?
There's LIHEAP will help with some of that. LIHEAP.
Low income heating and energy assistance program.
Correct. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, the
Or
utilities
maybe
also have medical
household income.
baseline programs that you can get reduced rates. And I would start by reaching out to whoever your provider is. So if your utilities PG&E, or if it's SMUD, or whoever you're working with, I'd reach out there because there are programs.
Perfect. All right. Well, great. So this brings us to the end of our presentation. I really want to thank the attendees for coming. We do have another keynote session that is starting right after this. So you can join that. So once session closes, this window, you'll look on the event website, and your internet browser, you'll be able to click join for the next session. But I do want to say a huge thank you to our translator, Nevir. Thank you for elevating this presentation for us. And a huge thank you to our panelists today. It's been wonderful to hear from Wendy, Alex, and Vance. Thank you for sharing some of your personal stories. And, not only that, I think it's, you've addressed some issues and you've offered some solutions to help folks be more prepared. Because as Vance had mentioned, I really like this, being prepared allows you from moving from fear to empowerment. So I think that was a great message to get across. So thank you to everyone for attending. And we hope that you join us for our closing session and keynote at 1 p.m. So feel free to take a little break and maybe grab something to eat or drink, go to the restroom, and we'll see you back at 1. Thank you all.
Hey, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, Wendy. Your internet held up wonderful. And thanks a lot, Vance.